computer. Tak, a začíname nahrávať a ja dávam slovo Tiborovi a Tibor bude rozprávať tak pol hodinku plus, nie 40 minút, jak to vyjde, a potom dáme priestor na vaše otázky a možno medzi tým, ak by niekto bol úplne stratený, môže sa opýtať?
Jasné. Kľudne sa budete po slovensky, po anglicky, ak chcete.
A Tibor bude rozprávať po anglicky, lebo je to pre ňoho jednoduchšie a bude mu rozumieť aj náš kolega z Indonézie, ktorý sedí s nami v miestnosti. Tak, nech sa páči, floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. I'm very glad to be here. So I think there's quite an overlap between what I'm going to present, between your interest, at least of some of you. So basically, as we discussed before, so how the presentation is going to look like. In the beginning, I'm just about the project, and then I will highlight that is the materials doing this project.
Prepáčte, ja sa ešte spýtam, že či dobre počujete, lebo ja som tam teraz zapojila externý mikrofón a niečo mi to tu rozpráva. Je dobre počuť?
Ja až tak nepočujem dobre.
Prosím?
Ja nepočujem až tak dobre.
Ty nepočuješ až tak dobre, tak možno, Tibor, si budeš musieť asi sadnúť, aby ťa to chytilo, lebo neviem, aký je tu problém s týmto. Dobre, tak skús ešte a vy povedzte, či počujete, aby sme to už vytunovali a mohli ísť ďalej potom. Tak skús niečo povedať.
Počujete ma?
Počujeme.
Dobre, tak
je to lepšie, hej.
OK, tak idem na to.
Počkaj, ešte sa pýtam, že turn up volume, ale to na to nevidím. Dobre, ideš na to. Keď to budem posúvať.
Yeah, so basically the idea of this project is to identify influential individuals in schools. And of course, as everyone else, students, adolescents in schools are bombarded from various sources when it comes to how to develop. But the older an adolescent gets, the older a child gets, for example, the more pronounced of peers becomes. So peers are crucial socialization factor. And if we know who influences whom, we can use this knowledge for mapping how people develop in schools and also how to intervene in these people. So basically using social network approach, I think it provided us with a lot of otherwise inaccessible information about how people develop in schools. We found, for example, that they influence each other's prejudice, smoking, drinking, etc. So basically, you can look at the influence between those people in some social context as some sort of a diet. So one person is influencing another person, and I think this is typically how psychologists look at this problem. So basically, especially social psychologists assume some social context, but they take these people out of the context and they study them in their interaction. But the idea is basically that these diets that are interacting together, if you put them together on top of each other, if you sum them, the whole part is more than just some of these parts. So for example, you can, as you for example can see in this graph, you can see these circles, let's say that they are adolescents, and these links are some relationships that they form. So for example, friendship. So as you can see, each diet, each two circles that are connected in this network are part of a bigger picture. And we have to know about this bigger picture to know what is actually happening also in these diets. So I borrowed this, it's called this common quote, and it's basically the idea that you have this macro phenomenon at the top and micro phenomenon at the bottom. So the idea is that if you have some social environment at the top left, it puts some constraints, if, for example, in a form of network, to how people interact, with whom you interact. So for example, let's say that you are a student of school, you want to interact with someone, but it doesn't mean that you are going to do that. Because, for example, people have some tendencies, like how they form friendships, like how they interact, and just this very context of a social networks can put some restraints on these dyadic relationships. Then these dyadic relationships will lead to some changes in individual outcomes, like, for example, changing prejudice, academic drive, etc. And if you sum this, for example, changes in these outcomes, it can create something that you don't expect, for example, like intergroup conflict or whatever else. So I think this is quite a useful illustration. It's very common, for example, in sociology, but it's a, I think, nice illustration of how things work, also for psychologists, just to think about how people develop in a social context. Yeah. So that was social networks. So why to use them? So these are the 6 school grades in Germany. And so you can see there's these links between different figures or different shapes are basically friendships that people formed. Different shapes are basically whether it's a girl or a boy. And you can see these different colors. So this is particularly about academic drive. So the red color means that basically they don't do their homework at all, while dark green means that they do their homework very frequently. What I want to point to is that you can see that, for example, people with similar color cluster together. And now the question is, okay, so you can see, for example, now this in the schools. So for example, friends perform quite similarly. There are friendship groups that smoke or don't smoke. So, but the question is how this actually came about, and that's the crucial information. So for example, students could influence each other. So for example, there was a non-smoker and smoker, they started smoking. The alternative explanation is basically that people with similar outcomes, like for example, smokers just became friends because they were smokers in the first place. So this is illustrated in this figure. So you can see this figure in the left, which is basically that imagine that you have a school and there are some, let's say that the blue person is a non-smoker, black person is a smoker. So they are together also with this gray indifferent person in the same school. Now they could form some friendships. And because, for example, this non-smoker, because of influence, this non-smoker can convince an indifferent person to actually be convinced non-smoker. And the opposite could happen for a smoker. So he could also influence a person he's interacting with. And eventually, basically, these indifferent people will become also known to their friends. An alternative explanation is basically that when students start school, they just signal something. So for example, I'm a smoker, I'm a smoker, and they just cluster together, they become friends, and they just hang out with each other. As you can see on the top right in each figure, the outcome is completely identical. So now is the question how to disentangle these processes because they are very different, there are very different implications. For example, we want to convince people to stop smoking in schools.
That's a tricky thing to do.
So, what we can do with networks, what they can tell us about. So let's say that you have this figure on the left. These links are friendships again. You have these black smokers, blue non-smokers. That's time point 1. Now we have this figure on the right, which is time point 2, let's say. And you can see this difference, which is a green arrow. So that is the change that was observed between 2 time points. And also, this green arrow points toward one individual who stopped smoking. So the question is, what happened in the middle? What happened between these 2 time points, which we want to find out? So one explanation could be, for example, influence. So they become friends, and this blue person convinced this other black person to become blue. Another explanation could be that you can see that, for example, this originally black individual, this original smoker, had a non-smoker friend in the beginning. Maybe this person stopped smoking because of this other friend. And because he stopped smoking, he found actually to be quite likable, but this other non-smoker. So it's quite different, right? And then there are also some different endogenous processes in networks, which is, for example, if there are 3 people, if there is, for example, a friend in common, you are more likely to select these people as friends. So for example, if you know someone who knows someone, maybe you will become friends with this 3rd person as well. Yeah, so there are different alternatives. And basically this approach I'm talking about could help you to disentangle these crucial processes. So now I'm going to be a little bit more technical. Yeah, so but so I'm going to specifically focus on one part of social network approach or social network analysis called stochastic actor-oriented modeling. It means that basically it's a quite different than from psychologists or what we are used to. So, like for example, when you do regression or correlation, you have some variables. This is a bit different. So basically, you have again 2 time points or more time points, and you observe some change between 2 time points. And you can expect some effects that are causing this change. For example, a person, you become a friend with a person because he wants to, for example, I don't know, reciprocate the friendship. That is the process that you assume is driving the change in the data. So you for example, observe what's happening, and then you can see whether it's, so you can feed some, so there's a simulation process. So basically, based on your theoretical knowledge of effects that are driving the change, you can try to explain the change in the data based on these effects. It's good, for example, so the new data is going to be simulated, for example, and then it's going to it's being compared, for example, whether your assumptions or how much your assumptions or effects that you assume that they are driving the change explain the data that really were observed. So basically, and these individuals that you are studying in the analysis is they can, for example, make a decision about changing a tie, changing a friendship, changing a relationship to others, or they can change their behavior or attitude. So how people decide what to do? And that is basically, as I said, it's simulated, it's not real. But you want to study these effects that are most likely causing the change. So basically, this is done in a, so basically, it's simulated how people decide. And it's called evaluative function. So basically, an individual has some understanding of how people are connected to each other. And what are their behaviors? And because the effects that you think are driving the change, it's representing the utility or happiness of a person. So for example, let's say that you say the person should reciprocate friendships, right? If you're a friend, if someone considers you a friend, you want to consider, you will probably become a friend. You will consider this person a friend as well. So basically the data will be, okay, if you created this relationship, you will be more happy, or it's basically more useful to you. So this person, based on some likelihood, might create this new tie or new relationship. There are several assumptions. I'm not going into that yet. But basically how a person thinks could, for example, or decide could be changing the network in his immediate surroundings. So the person has control only about his own types. And it could be, you can study various things with it. So for example, popularity, reciprocity with the I mentioned selection. So for example, you can say maybe boys will become more likely friends with boys because girls. So basically that is also something that you can model. And then we have behavioral function, which is, for example, influence. So we say, for example, that a person, an individual, would like to become more similar to their friends. And so basically the utility would be to increase the similarity in terms of behavior with these connected individuals. And this is done in a series of mini steps. So basically it's a simulation process, stochastic simulation process. So basically each individual is taken at a time. This person scans the network, looks about what to do, and decides how to do the change. And he can create or dissolve, maintain the tie, or change the behavior. So I guess if you are not familiar with this approach, I think it can be quite a lot of information. So I will just use this video, which basically could I hope a little bit more clarify about what's happening on the background of the analysis.
Bude aj zvuk, či nie?
Nie.
Dobre, ok, len kvôli tým dvom, čo sú
Yeah, so basically, this is basically what the analysis looks like. You can see this red circle, which is this main minister. So at one point, one person is the agent of change. One individual decides. And you can see that basically these individuals can do nothing. They can create a tie, drop a tie, change the relationship behavior, pardon. So basically the size of a circle represents the frequency of doing something, for example. So, for example, very small circle, person doesn't do that, and like
Doesn't do anything.
yeah, and doesn't do anything. For example, doesn't study. But the big circles study all the time, let's say. So basically, and this is the simulation, how people change. And this is like, this is simulated many steps, many times for each individual. And then you can compare, okay, so what was the most likely effect that was causing the change in your data? Okay, so that was the idea behind the social network approach, social network analysis, especially stochastic actor-oriented model. And that is the approach that I use in the studies that I'm going to just show you. So the main idea behind the project is how to identify influential individuals in schools. So what do I mean by being influential? So you can see this network on the left. That is like, let's say, original state. You can see these influential individuals, which are highlighted in red color. So some people, when I say influential or effective individuals, I mean that basically they are able to spread something in the network, let's say smoking or prejudice, whatever. And so, for example, let's say that at the start in original states, nobody smokes. Then these influential individuals start smoking. So there's this contagion. So it spreads in the network. Everyone starts smoking, for example. So it's just theoretical, but I hope you understand. So why we need to do that? So if you ever done an intervention, especially on a large scale, it's very expensive. It's very expensive. And so basically, if you select just a subset of influential individuals, especially in many schools, it's cheaper, it's more affordable. And the idea is that it will still preserve its effectivity as if you focus on the whole school. So, but even if you focus on the whole school, it might be still important to know who are the key players in a school. Who you are supposed to convince so the change in a school would actually happen. And the idea is that these influential individuals have some characteristics, some traits that are basically common to them, typical for them in different contexts. So there's a lot of literature about this on this topic, for example, relatively a lot. But I would argue that it's quite inconsistent. You have different indicators that could identify influential individuals that have especially different outcomes. But I think that basically one of the reasons for this inconsistency could be also different assumptions. So, for instance, some studies conducted simulations which could perhaps not reflect very correctly, or like did not include everything that needed to be included. Then you have, for example, studies that studied peer-to-peer influence. So the idea is, for example, if you are more influential in peer-to-peer interaction, you are going to be more influential in general. This is not necessarily true. So you might be more, for example, effective influencing others. Doesn't mean that it's going to spread in the whole school. And I think that especially illuminating our interventions, real interventions, the thing is that they should theoretically work. We have this knowledge. They should theoretically work, but they often do not work. And if they work, they are not replicated. So there's a lot needs to be done, from my perspective at least, to actually get from the point where we are to the point when we actually can use these network interventions or interventions in general. Okay. So there are different reasons why an individual can be especially influential. So, for example, you can occupy strategic position in the network from which it's just easier to spread something. Another reason for being especially influential is what I mentioned. You are just more likely to pass your attitudes or behaviors onto others to whom you are connected. So you are more likely to start a change in a network. Another reason, and I will focus on this one in the most detail because So the idea is that there are also some norms. So people can be connected, right? But they still can influence each other even if they are not connected. And so, for instance, let's say that we know that in a social context, people tend to create groups. They tend to create groups, and these groups can be even more important for them than the whole social context. So, for example, this particular graph highlights different colors represent different genders, so females and males. So the idea is that maybe males represent norms males, females females, and so people with female color would basically more or less automatically influence each other. Yeah. So basically, and the idea is that some individuals could be just more effective when it comes to influencing these particular norms. So before we started this project, we thought, okay, so norms are important. We should include them somehow. But we found, at least we think that it's currently under review. So, but we think that basically norms have not been properly included in social network analysis. And that is what we want to do in the beginning. So we can just use it later if we want. So we wanted, in this first study, we wanted to separate different types of peer influences. So normative pressure is quite different from friendship influence. Friendship influence is based on intimacy, liking, trust, whereas normative pressure is more top-down. It's that people want to gain some affiliation or avoid rejection. So it's quite different. And the idea is that, for example, people from the same group signal something, what is normative in a group. So, for example, if everyone in your group smokes, probably the norm is smoking. So that could be like descriptive norms, I think. So we thought that, okay, even if we include norms, maybe it has been already included anyway, and it bears no consequence. Because, for example, friends can communicate some norms to you. But it could be also quite unique processes. So this is what we wanted to disentangle. So belonging to a group has already been studied almost in every social.
Čo? Reload site. OK, niečo nám vypadlo. Počkajte chvíľočku. Vy vidíte ešte stále tú prezentáciu, alebo nám sa niečo stalo? Tak. OK. Vidíte prezentáciu, prosím vás, lebo nám tu niečo sa stalo s počítačom. Ksenia, vidíte?
Vidíme.
Dobre, tak môžeme ísť ďalej.
So even in this analysis, basically, in almost every study that focused on school context, included, for example, some selection based on some attributes in the beginning. So, for example, you are more likely to create friendship with people with the same gender or ethnicity or with the same behavior in the first place. And because of this selection, you are going to have more friends from this group, and this is how it shapes friendship influence. There's also other line of research which says this group membership also is important also at later stages. So, for example, that even though you have more friends from one group, you are going to be even more influenced by these people from this group. So it's like this double effect, let's say. There was this underlying assumption that these people communicate norms, but it hasn't been modeled. So this is what we wanted to disentangle. So we have this adolescent in yellow, which is adolescent you're interested in. For example, you have peers who are blue on the right, peers from the same group. So for instance, if this yellow adolescent is a male, people on the right, blue people on the right would be males, people on the left would be females. You have this big rectangle, which represent a friend, and the arrows, which represent who influences whom. So, for example, we would assume if there is normative pressure, people would, from the same group would influence an individual regardless of friendship. Friendship influence would assume that friends will influence each other regardless of group membership. And the third type is combining these two influences. So, friend influences you only if these friends belongs to the same group. So this is the data that we use. It's friendship related school data, 29 German school grades, almost 3,000 individuals, and 3 out of 6 waves. So we had 3 network measures that we used. One is friendship networks. That is, it's a changing network. So friendships change a lot in time. Then we have ethnic and gender network. we have two networks because we wanted to, in one set of models, we focus on ethnicity as a potential source of norms and then on gender. In these networks, basically people automatically connected. Then we have covariates, which is ethnicity, gender, and outcomes. So we studied 3 outcomes just to get some robustness. We had academic tribe, prejudice, and religiosity. And so that resulted in quite a lot of models. And we build a model from the very basic one to the most complicated ones. So first we had on friendship influence, only normative pressure, both of them separating influence of in-group and out-group friends, and all together. These are some details if you are interested, but I'm going to skip it for now. And these are the results basically. You can see these confidence intervals and the effect sizes. And this dashed line represents 0 to 0 effect. If the color includes 0, 0, the effect is basically non-significant.
Prepáč, že som to asi posunula, lebo
Yes.
Som chcela dať to preč, ale neviem to dať preč. Neviem to dať preč tu na, víš? To tam je videa obrazov.
So you can see 3 outcomes at the top, the academic track. In the middle, you have prejudice. And on the right, you have religiosity. On the left, you have effects. So friendship influence, normative pressure, influence same-gender friends, influence different gender friends. And then you have these 5 models. But basically, what is the conclusion of this is that we found friendship influence in all cases, as well as normative pressure. We have this weird finding for religiosity, which is negative influence, but we have some hypotheses about it. I'm not going into details, but I think that the take-home message is basically that we found normative pressure. Then you can see that influence of same-gender friends was always found, and friends with different gender never had an influence on an individual.
Okay.
And this is found from gender.
And what age was that again?
So it did
Like
from
what was the
12 to 17, I
Okay.
guess.
10.
Excuse me?
10. No.
No, I don't remember exactly at the moment, but I think it's
I
like,
saw 10.
so that's, you are right. But also, so that people grew older, right? It's 3 times. And basically, I guess that the data collection was conducted about once a year or once in 9 months or something. At the bottom, we switch to ethnicity instead of gender. So again, friendship influence, again, normative pressure. The difference is, though, that you can see that, for example, influence of same ethnicity friends kind of disappeared, especially in the case of prejudice, when we included normative pressure, and influence of different ethnic friends was always found as well. My hunch is basically that this shows kind of a superiority of gender in this network when it comes to influence, because yeah, that's how I interpret it.
And may I have a question related to that? Is there a high ethnic diversity in those networks?
Yeah. So
That might
ethnicities
be
were
the-
oversampled.
Yeah.
Ethnicities were
Because-
oversampled in this case.
Okay. Yeah, because there are just 2 genders. So theoretically. Okay, go ahead. I will ask.
Yeah. Okay. So, so just take away messages. So basically, we developed this new methodological approach about how to study normative pressure networks. We found that normative pressure is a unique type of peer influence that people should model if they study it. I didn't show you results about this, ignore it, but it can be found in this preprint if you are interested in it. Yeah, and and this is the second study I'm going to show you, and it's basically the identification of influential adolescents using simulated interventions. I should say that this is a very much a work in progress. So we are still working on it. So the purpose of showing you this is not that to know how it actually is, but basically just to illustrate what we are doing and what you could do if you use it as well. So I'm just going to repeat myself, but it's quite important information. So people could be influential for various reasons, because they occupy a strategic position, because they're influential in direct relationships, or because they influence norms that are important for an individual. Another thing that we want to disentangle in this study is absolute and relative influence. So as far as I'm aware of, people study absolute influence, which is by absolute, I mean that you can see this one influence string, one arrow. And that is basically the one arrow that represents this absolute value of, for example, higher popularity, the higher the influence a person has. So that would mean that, for example, these two black individuals have friends with different popularity. That would imply that person on the left would be more influenced by his friends than a person on the right, simply because his friends are more popular. That would also mean that, for example, a person with 1 would be more influential than a person with 4. But also person with 3 would be more influential than person with 4. So basically the idea is that popularity just grants you something that you can influence others, grants you some size of how being persuasive, for example. Relative strength means that basically you have one arrow per individual. So that means that basically every individual looks at its connections. You can have different distributions of popularity. So for instance, they could be even in different classrooms. What matters is basically who is the most popular among people you are connected to, among your friends or people with the same gender or with the same ethnicity. That would also mean that basically people doesn't mean you would be most influenced by a person with highest popularity, regardless of the popularity of other people you are not connected to. And I must say that that was quite a difficult task. We're still working on it. It's quite quite difficult to separate these two processes. Working on it. So the data, we use the same data.
It was 10 years old.
And these are the measures, and I'm just going to highlight the measures that we changed from the previous study. So we have this popularity. We have diegetic covariates. So let's just say that for the sake of actually studying this relative influence, we have a variable which says for each individual, we took his connections like friends, same gender peers, and identify 50% of those individuals with the highest popularity. And so far, we focus only on academic drive. So the frequency of doing homework.
Can I have a question?
Yes, sure.
How did you define popularity? Like the person with many connections, or?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and you're right. So basically, the more times a person was nominated as a friend, the higher the popularity. So I should also just say that basically we are looking at popularity at the moment, but we want to include quite a lot of other indicators as well. So just that's how we study it. So I just want to say what is social influence in this analysis. So it basically your attitudes have some average attitude. Your friends have some average attitude, your peers have some average attitude. And the idea of social influence is that person tries to become more similar to this average, right? So basically it doesn't go above or below, but it wants to hit the average of the connections. Can talk about it later if anyone is interested. And in simulations, so first we have this empirical test, right? We tested our hypothesis. In the second part, we have the simulations. So we have data at time point 1 that was used in the analysis. And then we basically have 3, let's say, experimental conditions. The first one is basically like a control condition, so no change. We didn't do anything. In the second condition, we took 50% of males and females with the highest popularity overall, and we changed their attitudes to be extremely positive. So they did their homework very frequently.
So how did you do that?
Just simulation. So basically, the idea is that if you have empirical results, you know what's happening in the network or in the data, right? So for example, if you have regression, you know, so for example, the higher, I don't know, more friends from one group, the lower the prejudice. You know how it should be. That's the empirical conclusion. Now you can say, okay, if this is like that, so theoretically, if you take it and do something, you should see what's happening and what are the changes in your data. So this is a theoretical experiment or simulated experiment. So we are looking, for example, what would theoretically change if we, for example, influence someone? What would happen?
Okay.
And it's quite difficult. It's a very complex process, especially because people are connecting this network. You have no idea what can happen. So first experimental condition, no change. Second experimental condition, we improve attitudes of 50% of males and females with highest popularity. Third condition, we did the same thing, more or less, but we didn't select 50% of males and females because of the high popularity, but we just randomly picked them, so regardless of their popularity. Okay, so these are basically how the results could look like. This was found in the data, so this was really estimated. And we just want to highlight that, for example, people selected friends based on gender, ethnicity, not based on this academic drive. The effect was very small. And this is how behaviors changed. So I would like to highlight especially, so preliminary findings, keep in mind, please. But this is what we found so far. Friends, influential. People from the same gender, influential. And when we had this relative and absolute influence, we found support only for relative influence and only when it comes to norms, so far. And this is basically what would change. So these are these three experimental conditions that I mentioned. And this is a distribution of attitudes or behaviors that was found in the simulations. So you can see this green peak. That would happen if we change nothing. So we are looking only at the people we didn't influence. So this is how the influence would spread in the network. Going from that green peak, we go to, by in degree means popularity, the social network term, and random. So regardless of whether you change 50% of people, their behaviors spread to non-influenced people. Right? So it just spreads, people just doing their homework more frequently in the data if you do the simulated intervention. But regardless of whether you pick these people randomly or based on popularity, the results are very similar. So this is very preliminary. It's probably going to change. I don't know in what direction, but it's going to probably change. So just this is, but this is basically what our outcome eventually, the outcome of this paper will look like. So I have no conclusions. I do not want to draw any conclusions because we want to finalize it first. First, it's quite difficult empirical model, and we are still working on it. I think we are coming closer. And then we also want to include different type of indicators of social influence. For example, some people could be more influential because they are perceived as being cool. They are leaders of their small groups in the network. So for example, let's say you have, I don't know, hip hop fans. So basically there's a leader among them perhaps. And we want to target those people as well. Then we want to look at critical mass. So for instance, if you change 10% of people, 20, 30, 50, it can have different conclusions. And we want to find which percentage of people still brings sustainable big change in data. Combination of own and alters popularity, which means, for example, this is a hierarchy principle. Okay, maybe you are more influenced by a person with high popularity, but how your popularity comes into place. Maybe people are influenced only, for example, if their connections are less popular. That's also what we want to bring into the picture. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now I open the floor for questions which may be asked in Slovak. And I forgot to mention that actually this is the first time Tibor presents this, right? So we were the testing animals for this. And also that Tibor applied with a very similar project for the Recovery Plan of Europe R3 scholarship for excellent researchers at our institute. So we still don't know how that will end up, but well, we will see until June. And so if I may, I will ask the first question while people online and offline think about their questions. And maybe Tibor, I think the first thing you should explain a little bit more in detail, what is the data you are working with? Because I know, because I read your proposal, but yeah, so please, if you could tell us more about the data you are working with actually. And then Ksenia is raising her hand.
Yeah, so the data, so basically the data that I'm using is, so these are network data. So basically, let's say that people go in a social context for example, in school, and they ask people about who are your, I would call them connections, but it's basically relationships. So, for example, who is your friend? Who is clever? Who you like? Who you cooperate with? Who is your study partner? And this is basically how people nominate each other, and those are the links that you saw in those graphs. So basically, you have these circles. There are individuals, we know that they are in school, and these links, they basically tell us about those links themselves.
So, and this is a data set from Germany, which is longitudinal, right? And-
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah. It's a German data set containing quite a portion of ethnic minorities. Very nice data set, I must say, available.
so it is a kind of sociometric exercise the kids do, just to
You mean like literally,
what
like
they,
what they do?
what they
Okay.
do, yeah, just to determine the influence and the popularity and the, just to
So-
imagine what is the basic entry that you are working with.
So basically, it's a matrix. So it's basically a raster of there are different approaches. You can use art, you can use paper and pencil, you can do the vertical line. But basically, typically, people are either given a list of their classmates, for example, and they just click the partners that they, for example, nominate as best friends. Alternative would be, for example, you are just giving empty space and just write down your, for example, friends. Each individual has some unique identifier, so we can then just use it.
And this is mandatory in Germany for every school to do this
No.
athletics with the children?
No. So this is basically, this is from, I want to say around Mannheim. It's a city in Mannheim. Basically, this data collection in 10 schools with 3,000 individuals. Yeah, it's not happening on big scale, unfortunately.
So just from one city, basically, from
Region.
region. Okay.
Yeah.
the
So
whole
basically,
region.
it's very nice data collections. For example, they had this region. They had some schools. They just randomly pick the schools and then just work together.
Okay. Thank you.
Is it just the network or also have some characteristics of particular?
Yeah.
Like socio-demographic.
Of course, yeah. So basically, you have these network measures. Then you have attitudes, behaviors. So the particle dataset I'm working with is focused on ethnic identity, religious identity. So you have religion, ethnicity, but also identification, like personal identification. So for example, like you could see that I was working with prejudice. This prejudice includes several group, religious or ethnic group, excluding your own group. But we also excluded people not only so typically ethnicity is described where you were born or your parents where they were born. But we also asked people like, who are you identified with? And then we excluded these people as well. If they felt like Germans, but they were born in Turkey, we just didn't include attitudes towards Germans as a form of prejudice, for example.
So the sample counts around several 100,000 children.
3,000.
3,000.
3,000.
And what was the attrition rate between the?
Yeah, it's very nice data set. I mean, I want to say they ended about 10%,
Okay.
15%. Not really sure.
Wow.
So I'm using free waves also because, of course, attrition increases in time. Children change schools. So I use free waves and I'm very satisfied
Okay.
with the quality of the data.
Thank you. Ksenička, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm not using my camera. I'm
We
speaking with the
don't
button
hear you
I
very
have
well,
present-
so please shout or.
Well, I cannot shout that well, but
Okay, so I will
so-
try to do the microphone from there, and I think we will hear you better.
Uh-huh.
Now it's better.
now.
And now it's good.
Okay. So thank you really for this talk. Very interesting. I was wondering, I have two questions. One is, do you look at the direction of behavior, whether it's positive or negative? So for example, whether prejudice spreads more easily than positive attitudes or, bad grades, good grades. So whether one type of behavior is more kind of contagious than the other direction of the behavior. And second is at the beginning, there was a slide with different types of networks. So there were some networks that had more clusters, kind of more cliques, and some that were more interconnected. So I was wondering whether this changes over age, because it can have some implications for when is best to do interventions, right? And or whether it changes depending on the context, if there is maybe more segregation in school, diversity, etc.
Was trying to find graphs you mentioning. So
Okay, so
you mentioned these
the-
ones.
Oh,
Yeah, for example, yeah.
So first question, so sometimes like what I study are binary outcomes. So for example, smoking, non-smoking. So there's no point, for example, looking at whether positive behaviors or negative behaviors spread more likely. But then you have, of course, like for example, prejudice. So there is some research about it, but at the moment we are not considering looking into it. So for example, whether positive attitudes or negative attitudes are going to more likely spread. Actually, I'm working on something similar in different project, in different study, but I don't want to include it in this picture because it's very complicated already now. So no, probably we are not going to include it, but yeah, I think it's a good point. And the second point, age in clustering. I think like what's difficult is also like what you should consider is there are some processes in the network. Some networks are clustered, some networks are not clusters, and it might not be the thing of age, but age. I would not say that. I personally think that not age, but the duration of being in the same environment would stimulate creating of clusters. Meaning that if there is some strong tendency, and I don't think this applies to necessarily all classrooms or all schools, but if there is a tendency to create clusters, it will of course show during time. So at the beginning, the data will probably not be that clustered, but in time, I would assume that maybe the clustering will increase. So for example, if just hypothetically, if people select friends based on gender, for instance, maybe the longer they are in the classroom, the more segregation along this line will be shown. But I'm not ever of a research that would actually look at the connection between age and clustering.
okay, thank you. So any other questions, either online or here? Because I have one, but I don't want to. Kovačić, pardon. I didn't bake the cake, but I bought. So yeah, I have a question. So you spoke repeatedly about interventions, and there is this idea of Paluk and Shepherd behind that okay, you don't need to target the whole class or the whole school, but those people who are like social reference can spread the social change in the context. But what can we tell based on this data about possible change in a different context? So can you sort of, like based on the knowledge from this context, can you make any inferences about possible change in other contexts as well? If you want to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we want to change behaviors or norms, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, so that's the purpose of the project. Find the characteristics that are translatable across different contexts. So for instance, maybe you have some variation, of course, right? So for example, sometimes, let's say that two characteristics point towards influential people, but not, of course, not to the same degree. In some classrooms, maybe something will be more important. But the idea is to select something that just works better than others measures. Because you can't do this fine-grained analysis in every case when you want to do an analysis. So yeah, I think it's generalizable. At least I mean, the data are very nice. Of course, there's a question of, for example, would it work in Slovakia? No idea. But I mean, that's also a question for the future research. So for instance, I think that this is even in this analysis, I think that eventually what we will have to do is just real intervention and just to see whether it works. Maybe we are forgetting something anyway. So yeah, at the moment, we are trying to theoretically understand what's happening in the data and to improve the theory. And at some point, we would like to also conduct some real interventions just to see whether it works.
But those interventions there would be conducted in Netherlands, right? So in the
That's I mean, like that's a
or something.
plan in the future, not in this project. That's
Okay.
just like not doable
Okay.
at the moment.
It would be associated. Can I have a question?
Yes, of course, Gabo has a question, so
Yes.
shout, please.
You mentioned three principles for spreading the influence, like one was the natural tendency to create groups, and the other one was the normative, and the first, I think, what it was, but definitely these two, in my view, are competing, because they can have opposite tendencies. So, the natural tendency to create a group to link together, let's say, with someone who is sympathetic to me, can be in conflict with the normative expression, the value expression of the person. So, being attracted and at the same time being expelled from the contact. And so, do you compute also these competing tendencies of the
Yeah. I mean, they are modeled at the same time.
and what is the result? Which is stronger? Or can you say something about the power distribution? Because I did once after the Velvet Revolution research on the leaders, on the mechanisms how the environmental values and the environmental preferences were spread in the social environment in let's say in this age groups of adolescents. And it was a qualitative analysis with the leaders of the environmental, which was also part of dissident movement party in Slovakia. And the result was very surprising. So that it was completely not driven by the normative, by the value part or content, but it was explicitly driven by the tendency to form a group, to belong to a group and to be happy in a group. And the values just came in a secondary slot into the agenda of the group. So it was definitely not about values. Getting environmental preferences was just a consequence of being socialized into a friends group.
Yeah. So that would mean basically there is no selection, but there is influence, right? So there is no selection like you from friends just because you like them, regardless of their attitude.
There is a selection, but there is a social selection, not the normative selection.
So what I can say that basically we include both tendencies. So and they work at the same time. But I mean like they are like so there are many effects that are basically causing what's happening in these networks. And it's not humanly possible to just look at it and say, okay, you have this effect, this effect, this effect, you have 20 effects, let's say, and you will know what's happening in 3 years based just looking at this data. It's just, that's why we have these social computational methods. So that's why we have these simulations, because they can show us surprising findings. So for example, for instance, what could happen is that there are some individuals, for example, and everyone thinks that they are the leaders. They are who are convincing everyone to start smoking or drinking alcohol. And then they start smoking and drinking alcohol, and suddenly there are no leaders anymore. Right? That could happen theoretically.
Because they're not interesting anymore.
The idea, our idea is basically to find the leaders that have some characteristics that are not dependent on the behavior. So for example, if we change them, so to say, then basically they would not lose the influential position. Right? So for example, let's say that we do intervention and nobody will listen to them anymore because they are not interesting or whatever anymore. So we are trying to find, but there's many things that are in the play, and it's very difficult to say what could happen. It's not separate things that are happening. So they're happening at the same time, basically.
Yeah, but with what you express now, I have a difficulty to agree, because I understand you take the person as an object, something what is object of the influence of the other participants, actors, yeah? And so this doesn't help, because we maybe should see people as actors themselves, as becoming themselves subjects of the decision. So
I mean,
it gives only one view of
Like it's one directional in a way, right?
absolutely one direction. How I'm hearing.
No. It's not one directional. It's of course bidirectional. That's also one of the difficulties why you can't say who is influential, because people are influencing each other at the same time. And that's how it is modeled actually. So it's about the likelihood of adopting every attitude, for example, among your friends, But these other friends are also deciding in a similar fashion, right? They are deciding simultaneously. So that's also the difficult part. But that's what you can do, for example, with this analysis. You didn't think of it. People are deciding in the same context at the same time, and you want to find, for example, something common to these decisions. And the thing that basically people decide based on their friends, for example, that they develop in the direction of their friends' attitudes, that has been supported many times. That's not really new.
Was also supported in the context of prejudice in Budapest by Luca, for example, how kids adapt to
I mean, like,
prejudice norms.
it has been supported with prejudice, smoking, drinking, environmental attitudes, I don't know, many things, criminality.
Yeah, Ksenichka has another question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, you mentioned you work with binary variables, so smoking, not smoking, but how do you apply it to, like prejudice, or where do you draw the line? Who is prejudiced, who is not?
Sme ťa moc nepočuli dobre, Ksenia. Môžeš zopakovať, prosím ťa, tú otázku, lebo...
I'm looking, where is my microphone on the laptop? Is it now better?
Yeah.
So you were mentioning that you use binary variables like smoking or not smoking, right? So I was wondering where do you draw a line on concepts that are not so simple in terms of yes or no, like prejudice?
Which are like more or less on a scale, right?
I mean, okay, so I was using examples. Actually, I'm very rarely working with binary data. I'm more interested in behaviors on a scale, like frequency. I was mentioning smoking, not smoking because it's the example. Like you either smoke or not smoke. So that's why I use that example. But you can show if you want to use this analysis, you can use binary. You can use, for example, something on a Likert scale. Let's say prejudice or frequency of doing something. And there are also developments into continuous variables. But it's especially with the analysis. So I'm not speaking about social network approach at the moment, but particularly about stochastic actor-oriented modeling. So you can use basically also continuous variables at the moment, but it was developed mainly on, for example, ordinal scales or binary, which it's difficult to explain. So basically, you can study, for example, various effects that I showed you. And there is more opportunity more effect that you can study at the moment with not continuous outcomes. But continuous outcomes are also being developed.
Okay.
Or inclusion of continuous outcomes.
Gabo? Nech sa páči.
I'd like to ask about these drawings here. Do they represent all the children in your sample? So can it be taken like this is a typical construction of the social interactions in age 6, age 7, 8?
No, pardon. So this is school grade, and it's like, but it's not like you are in the first grade, second. It is like different school grades. There are different people.
So it is not the same group in different grades, but different people.
It's like not a classroom, but it's like a classroom.
Each of the pictures represent how many children?
Well, it depends. It varies because it's not the same school grade, but the data contain from 50 up to 150 individuals.
Each picture, yeah?
I have 29 of them. These are just examples.
Because I like the differences between them and just to think about why this construction looks like in school grade 2, there are two opinions which try to communicate between them, and in grade 3 there is a tendency to get together, and then between school grade 5 and 6, like Piaget has come on the scene, and because in the school grade 5 they tried to develop the diversity but still communicate among themselves. Yes. But in grade 6 then it's completely different. They get arguments why to support one another or to be in absolute opposition to both of these strong opinion groups.
And Olinka has
grade 3. What do you think about this grade 3?
There must be some frustration from school. After 2 years at school, you are so frustrated, you hate all the teachers and parents, and you love on
You
your
become a
schoolmates,
cohesive
and you get together with your schoolmates.
There are actually some,
This
That's a psychedelic
some kind of defense
but this is the same age. So
It's the same age, okay.
school.
against schools.
Yes.
yeah, but I mean like
They're same age.
this is the same age, yes.
All the teachers are same age.
Yes.
But
Difference.
So different school grades, but it could be same school.
So in the school grade 1, these are the children who repeat the.
No, but-
class 1, 5,
No, school grade is like can I in Slovak?
of course.
Je napríklad prvá A, B, C, D.
Aha, čiže
Grades sú všetky prváci.
to znamená, že to je school grade 1 je prvá A, school grade 2 je prvá B, nie.
Nie, to je proste náhoda. To je proste takto sú label, to je nejaký identificator. To je akože...
Z jednej školy prvá A, z druhej školy.
Nie, oni sú v rovnakej škole. Jedna grade, jeden level. Sú to prváci z jednej školy. Alebo druháci z jednej školy.
Ale sú to prváci, druháci, tretiaci, štvrtáci, piatáci, nie.
Nie necessary.
Aha.
Ale na škole máme jednu skupinu, ktorá je excelentná, a potom je taká jedna, ktorá je akože len taký odpad, by som v úvodzovkách povedal, hej?
To by bolo zohľadnené v tých simuláciách a v analýze.
To je stochastické analýze, tomuto kategorizácii nerozumiem.
Ani ja. Ešte raz nám to vysvetlí, prosím, polopate. Že čo je school grade 1 a aký je rozdiel medzi ním a school grade 2 a 3 a 4 a 5 a 6?
Takže toto sú iba príklady.
OK.
To nemá žiaden dopad na analýzu, pretože by sa toto nedá pochopiť, len takto sa na to pozerať.
Čiže toto sú
Ten point je-
hypotetické príklady.
To sú reálne dáta.
Reálne dáta.
Triedy, ale triedy.
To sú school grades, to sú...
Ročníky.
Reálne ročníky.
Ale tie súvisia s vekom.
No. Čiže keď...
To je jedno.
Ale school grade 1 je prvý ročník?
School
A
grade
títo
1
prváci mali malé
je
deti.
ročník, ktorý má v datách identifikátor 1.
No to
je
je
To
úplne-
znamená, že to nemusí byť prvý ročník, ale...
Nemusí.
OK, ale je to nejaký ročník.
Je to nejaký
A
ročník.
to druhé je nejaký iný ročník, ale neznamená to, že je to druhý ročník.
Presne.
Jasné, chápem. OK.
Ale môže to byť aj rovnaký ročník, ale?
Môže to byť rovnaký vek, ale je to v podstate
Ale
ročník
čo na
inej
to
školy.
potom hovorí, keď to nevieme, že ak či sú to starší, mladší, to je strašne metúce potom.
Čo sa teda odlišujú?
No, v tej štruktúre.
V
tej štruktúre.
Takže to je len ukážka toho, že môžu byť rôzne štruktúry.
Presne tak, hej.
Týkajú, to vôbec neviem.
Ja som v tej prezentácii hovoril, že v podstate, akože, čo som týmto chcel ilustrovať, je iba to, že v podstate ľudia s podobnými farbami zvyknú byť spojení.
Hej, a to a to je úplne vidno, hej, že tí červení sú tam a tí zelení sú tam.
Ale ja som úplne stratený, ja som absolútne nepochopil, o čo tu ide v celom to. Vôbec mi to není jasné, že ako sa tí ľudia spájajú, prečo sú tie iné
To sa
vzory.
nedozvieme, lebo to ľudí zaujíma.
A že ako to bolo počítané, to už vôbec nerozumiem, proste, ako ja mám pocit, že vôbec neviem, o čom som tu hodinu počul.
Tak vysvetli school grade 1, čo je, Tibor, ešte raz, aby to bolo.
To len ukážka.
To je len ukážka, hej. Ale že máš tam napríklad trojuholníky sú chalani a sú baby a guličky sú chalani napríklad. Pozri sa. Baby máš v jednej skupine,
No
chalanov máš v
a
druhej.
čo?
A ďalej,
No ale to vieme.
to je jasné, to vieme.
Áno. A proste keď napríklad niekto nominuje niekoho iného, to je môj kamarát, tak budú spojení ľudia.
Čiže baby
No,
nominujú baby a chalany chalanov. A teraz tam máš ešte farby. Tak povedz ešte tie farby ešte raz.
Farby znamenajú, že proste, že keď je tmavá zelená, tak tí ľudia si robia často domáce úlohy.
Áno.
Keď je tmavá červená, tak si ich nerobia nikto. Čiže to je
Áno,
vlastne nejaká frekvencia
veď
správania.
Ja tým slovám rozumiem významu tých slov, ale nerozumiem, že k čomu to vedie.
On má k dispozícii asi v 5 dimenziách údaje od tých 3000 žiakov.
No.
O každom, či si robí úlohy, či chodí do kostola, kto je mu sympatický v triede, blízky, hej, koho nenávidí a neviem, čo ešte tam bolo. No. A teraz ich dáva, ten model to dáva počítač
a vidíme teraz rôzne, a čo? Ja stále nerozumiem point.
A vidíme, že ľudia s podobnými charakteristikami sú prepojení, hej?
No tak ale to vieme už asi 10 000
No,
rokov.
ale máš na to teraz akože networkové dáta, ktoré ti to ukazujú, hej? Na veľkej škále vlastne vstupov.
Ten point je to, že napríklad, prečo ja používam túto analýzu, môžete to robiť, prečo chcete. Ja prečo to používam, je v podstate ten môj cieľ je to, že v podstate niektorí ľudia môžu proste ľudia šíria sa tam napríklad nejaký postoj v triede.
No.
A ja chcem povedať tomu, že ako. A kto je ten hlavný človek?
Áno, tomu som tiež rozumel, ale no.
Ale že nevieš, ako to vyčítať z toho grafu, hej?
Ale to sa nemá vyčítať, to hovorím, že proste...
To je prípravná fáza, to je ten list, v ktorom budú tie
Nie, to je to proste náročný analytický postup, ktorý proste tá idea je, že áno, môžete sa to snažiť niečo vyčítať, ale čo vyčítate môže byť veľmi nepravdivé, je to random. Ale preto je tá analýza, aby nám pomohla pochopiť, čo napríklad spôsobuje to šírenie tých postojov napríklad. A kto je napríklad ktorý ten trojuholník je viac vplyvný ako iný trojuholník. To tiež, ako to sa nedá povedať. To musíme zanalizovať.
No dobre, ale tak čo zatiaľ ste zistili? Lebo ja som sa tak pochopil, že ten normatívny kontext je asi najdôležitejší.
Zistili sme, že napríklad ten normatívny kontext je dôležitý, aj napríklad tie linky, čiže sú tam vlastne viac vplyvov, ktoré formujú tie postoje. Zistili sme, a proste teraz sa snažíme aplikovať na to, že proste dobre, teraz máme tie teoretické znalosti, alebo teda empirické znalosti, ktoré sú transformované na nejaké teórie. A chceme to otestovať teda, že ako by to teda vyzeralo, že ktorí tí ľudia by teda mohli vlastne rozšíriť najefektívnejšie svoje postoje alebo správanie.
Dobre, a jaká je tá základná hypotéza?
No tak my vlastne testujeme, sú rôzne indikátory, ktoré by mohli identifikovať vplyvných ľudí. Ja som hovoril o popularite, ale sú aj rôzne iné. A môže to závisieť aj na správaní, aké sa šíri. Ne? Takže vlastne teraz my budeme mať akože sériu modelov a v každom modeli sa zameriame napríklad na istý indikátor, napríklad na popularitu, alebo neviem, veľa vecí sa tam dá. Napríklad tie strategické pozície, to sú také tie network proste merania. Napríklad niektorí ľudia spájajú skupiny.
Takže sú centrálni v tom networku, hej?
Alebo sú centrálni, alebo spájajú skupiny, alebo sú možno na periférii a sú menej ovplyvniteľní ostatnými, čiže sú takí ideálni ľudia, ktorí to šírili. Je tam veľa možností a my ich teraz budeme postupne testovať.
Na zdravie.
A budete ich testovať jakým spôsobom, že vždycky si zoberiete jedno kritérium a spustíte niečo takéto a zistíte trošku to.
Potom si zistíme tie simulácie, napríklad povieme, že OK, čo keby náhodou, čo keby teoreticky sa napríklad niekto začal fajčiť, alebo si myslím, alebo zhorší sa mu predsudok, alebo zlepší, alebo si nájde iného kamaráta, alebo niečo také. A pozrieme sa, čo by sa teoreticky stalo s ostatnými. Ako by sa to šírilo tou sieťou. Lebo je možné, že sa to nestane nič. Je možné, že sa to rozšíri iba.
Potom si zoberete nejakého jedinca
My ich zoberieme,
s nejakými charakteristikami.
my ich budeme brať rôzne počty.
Áno.
Že napríklad zoberieme 10% ľudí s istou charakteristikou, alebo 20, alebo 30, alebo 40
Áno.
a pozrieme sa, ako sú ovplyvnení tí ostatní, že koľko ich musíte napríklad zobrať, aby ste dosiahli taký výsledok, aký chcete.
Aby ste ovplyvnili tak veľa, aby ste zmenili postoj kritickej masy, napríklad ľudí, koľko na to potrebujete influencerov, hej, napríklad.
Napríklad.
OK.
A to bude dobré na nejakých časových intervaloch.
Čo týka času, čas zahrnieme v tom zmysle, že možno sa ten vplyv vytratí. Alebo, čo napríklad už vieme teraz, že sa môže stať napríklad obzvlášť s popularitou, že popularita je veľmi variabilná. Je to fakt prekvapivé, ako často si tí ľudia menia kamarátov, ako sa tá popularita mení. A že napríklad viem od niekoho, ktorý robil intervenciu, že v podstate spravili intervenciu 1 rok a druhý rok už 50% aj tých, čo boli v kontrolnej skupine, už neboli označení za tých najpopulárnejších. Čiže my tam zahrnieme tieto časové otázky.
Áno, to sú longy. Teraz Jana chcela niečo povedať a Matúš sa hlási tiež, ale Jana bola prvá tuto.
Áno, možno, že by pomohlo, keby sme si rozdiela sociometria a čím pomohlo, vlastne oni tiež robili network analýzy, nerobil to cez počítače, ale tiež nakoniec výsledok bol graf. A tiež tam brali do úvahy rôzne premene a tiež to robili včas. A teraz pre mňa by bola veľká pomoc, keby som pochopila, že v čom tento prístup je inakší, respektíve v čom to počítačové spracovanie tých dát môže priniesť zásadne odlišné poznatky.
Čiže otázka, a zopakujem tým, čo možno nepočuli, že v čom toto môže priniesť zásadne odlišné poznatky oproti klasickej sociometrii, ktorá tiež merala nejaké vzťahy a tiež bola v čase, hej?
Rôzne parametre, šlo tam len, že kto sa stýka, ale kto ako vážení, brali sa do úvahy rôzne poznačky a tak ďalej, rôzne inklinácie, či postoje.
Takže ak to chápem správne, tak vy sa ma teraz pýtate, že keď hrajíte tým, že čo spôsobí tým, že to dáme do počítača, že rozdiel medzi kvalitou a kvantitou. Ako som povedal, videli, napríklad ja vám to takto ilustrujem.
Z 3000 ľuďmi nemáš čo vysvetliť. No.
No,
Áno, ale ja sa pýtam nielen po
Akože-
tej kvantite, ale či to máš šancu objaviť nejaké
Napríklad,
iné...
inú, akože,
kvalitu.
ale to, čo povedal vlastne, že ako keby to má nejakú metakvalitu asi
Áno,
ešte,
tak,
nie?
tak.
Že, a čo to je? To sa pýtaš,
Áno,
hej?
to sa pýtam.
ja napríklad, pozrite sa, napríklad je pár efektov, ktoré testujeme v tom, že ako ľudia iba menia tie linky medzi sebou. A väčšina z nich proste je signifikantná.
Ale to vedeli
Ale,
aj sociológovia.
no to sa ale nedá odlišiť, keď sa iba pozrite na papier. To nie je možné. Lebo proste je to príliš veľa efektov a všetky sú to je conditional, sú na sebe závislé. Že proste keby som teraz napríklad vypustil reciprocity, všetky efekty sa zmenili.
Jasné, lebo je to akože vzájomný systém.
Je to vzájomný systém. Čiže napríklad, ja vám to ešte ukážem na tomto príklade.
Že všetky tie efekty sú spolu, hej, ako v hre, hej, že nie sú separátne.
Ja vám to ešte ukážem tu. Že napríklad, tam som zmenil iba jednu vec. Väčšinou v tom networku, tam sa zmení toho veľa. A proste už len z takéhoto jedného príkladu nemôžeme povedať, že vlastne čo sa stalo, len keď to vidíme na papieri. To sa nedá. Musíme proste akože to zanalýzovať proste s dostatočným počtom dát a proste s nejakou sofistikovanou analýzou.
Nejakú sofistikovanú štatistikou.
Sofistikovaná analýza je jasná. Ale teraz tá konceptualizácia tých výsledkov.
Že to sa tam vlastne stalo, hej?
Áno, čo sa stalo?
Akože čo sa stalo vo fielde.
Konceptuálny rámec bohatší, nuanso, proste čo prináša nové.
Tak napríklad, ja neviem, tak napríklad, akože ja sa pohybujem v tej oblasti vlastne sociálneho vplyvu. To je to, čo ma primárne zaujíma. Tak napríklad, akože ja si myslím, že napríklad ušla tá možnosť odlišiť to, že či ľudia sú napríklad sa ovplyvňa, alebo či sa stanú kamarátmi. V prvom spôsobe to je veľmi zložitá vec. To je ja som počul proste aj od fyziku napríklad, že to nie je možné. To sú proste veci, ktoré sa stavajú na ten istý čas, vedú k rovnakým veciam, sú pozorované. Takže ani tá analýza toto nie je nejaká magic wand, že teraz proste akože nám vyrieši všetky problémy. Je to veľmi komplikované, si myslím, je to celkom sofistikované, ale stále akože toto sú fenomény, ktoré sa dejú kontinuálne, ktoré sa dejú simultáne, ktoré proste, je to veľmi ťažké rozlišiť. Ale táto analýza proste nám to napríklad umožnila. Iba sa rozlišiť, iba to, že napríklad teda, že ako to teda je. A zistili sme, že to je napríklad u rôznych správaní sa to takto, proste to funguje rôzne. Ja som ukazoval napríklad toto robenie domácich úloh. Ľudia si nevyberajú proste kamarátov na základe toho, že ako si im darí v škole. To napríklad si myslím, že toto napríklad by možno niekto tvrdil inak, keby sa iba pozrel na tie dáta, možno by povedal, že ľudia proste s rovnakými známkami sú kamoši. Ale oni sa nestali kamoši.
Pretože majú rovnaké znaky.
Oni sa ovplyvnili, čo je napríklad podľa mňa celkom akože taký dôležitá vec. Druhý príklad, ktorý mám napríklad rád, je napríklad skúmali, ako sa napríklad vyvíjajú postoje žien, ale teda dievčat v školách, čo sa týka STEM subjektov, takže akože vedeckých subjektov. A že kto ich teda ovplyvňuje. Je to trieda, sú to teda chlapci, dievčatá, sú to kamaráti. Dokázali rozlíšiť takéto veci. Ale toto sú napríklad školy. Ale napríklad, keď to beriem moc obecne, tak napríklad sú dobré papery, napríklad už len behom covidu napríklad. Lebo akože ľudia žijú v sieťach. A COVID sa šíril tým, že sme sa nakazili. To je contagion. To je presne to, čo študujem, akorát nie s vírusom, ale s postými správaním. A to proste, to je príliš veľa ľudí na to, aby sme to dokázali sa na to pozrieť na papieri a zistili ich odpoveď.
Ešte máme 6 minút a prvý sa hlásil Matúš a druhý Ivan, tak Matúš, poprosím z teba.
No, ja som mal otázku, to trochu súvisí možno aj s tým, čo ste teraz vraveli, aj tomu sa predtým rozprávalo, že akože dobre, teda vás zaujíma, že či napríklad zmena návyku niekoho populárneho mohla zmeniť napríklad jeho priateľov, alebo že akože do akej miery nejako musí byť vplyvný, aby sa to zmenilo, ale čo napríklad, ako dobre niekto populárny, kto napríklad prestane fajčiť, a teraz prestanú fajčiť nejakí traja jeho kamaráti, ktorí sú tiež nejak medzi sebou spojení, ale ako vy viete povedať, že to bola zmena práve u toho človeka, čo u nich spôsobila to prestanie fajčenia. Čo ak tam nastala udalosť, že napríklad jednému z tých kamarátov zomrel otec kvôli fajčeniu a to spôsobilo, že tí traja teraz prestali fajčiť.
Zhodou
Že,
okolností.
no, akože sa môže stať, alebo robíte akože tie prejudice, a napríklad sa v Nemecku stane vtedy akože nejaký útok teroristický, tak samozrejme to tiež ovplyvní ako všeobecne prejudice, že ako si viete
Že ako aj
istí,
tie
že...
externé dáta vlastne
Áno,
dáš
že
do toho
ako
systému.
si viete byť istí,
Ten
že tá
kontext.
zmena, ktorá nastala v tej...
V tom networku, alebo je
v tej
kontext,
networku.
akože context bound nejak.
Áno.
To je dobrá otázka.
A ak si k tomu hovorili, tak som to
Ne.
prehľadol.
Nespomínal som to, ale tam sú dve otázky. Že prvá otázka je, že konkrétne v tých simuláciách tam nenastane úplne nejaká náhodná zmena, alebo ja to kontrolujem. Že ja zmením tých ľudí a potom tým pádom, že to je robené vlastne v rôznych tých ročníkoch. Nám hovorí po anglicky, či po slovensky?
Ako chceš. A in English? Však for us is all speak English.
Akože sú ľudia na...
Ste v pohode, ak budeme, či chcete po slovensky? Iď po anglicky, nehaziť zlú mám v obraze.
So again, sorry.
So we are asking about contextual influences on the networks and about how Tibor can disentangle them.
Yeah. So basically, the first question was that how do I know that other people did not change and post their results that basically I'm also doing?
Or if there was more like another.
Yeah. So that's thanks basically to in simulations, I have complete control. So I know the data and I just basically compare different school grades. And so, for example, if I change someone and with similar characteristics, someone in 29 other school grades, and I observing someone, right? So that is the first question. But the second question, I think that is something that I like it. And so basically, you can see these effects there that are called linear, quadratic, and average group. Linear means that basically what is the general change or shape of attitudes or behaviors in the whole network.
Okay.
So for example, how is everyone changing?
Right.
That's basically the same as quadratic, just quadratic effect. And average group means, for example, if you have average small prejudice, let's say, and on the point from 1 to 5, it's 3. How this particular value influences change in your values. So that is, yeah, you're right. It should be, and it is inherently included, basically, the changes in the whole network. And
yeah, I think so you have a way to see like if something suddenly changes the whole group as a whole.
That would be captured probably by linear, quadratic, or average.
I would still say like you could have maybe those like individual cases where it might be like it might not affect everyone, just like small group, but still from the outside. But the fact that, as you said before, that yeah, like if you do the same like control on all the groups, then of course probably everyone.
So what you are talking about is basically another intervention.
Yeah.
So to say, for example, if something happens, something is a strong point. Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So basically, it would be if it's only for some people in the network. I think it should be captured in those effects. But if you are interested in that effect, I think you should disentangle it. But for me, it's just a control.
Yeah, okay. But I feel that it
Yeah, so Ivan, you had a question, and please, if there are any questions from online, don't hesitate.
Môže byť ako slovenský.
Ja som rozmýšľal, že praktická otázka pre ľudí, ktorí robia s tými predsudkami, že dá sa identifikovať nejaký človek, ktorý je z minority a jeho cesta stať, ako sa stane ten influencer, ten, ktorý má vplyv.
Že na začiatku nemá vplyv.
Hej, a je z minority, je na okraji, je na vlastne spoločnosti. Dajú sa tie dáta takto použiť?
So the question was whether someone Azizul who is basically at the beginning not influential and he's at the periphery, how he became influential. Whether we can identify that.
Yeah. So in English.
Go ahead.
So basically,
yes.
The thing is that I think there are two different things that you can do in this type of interventions. One is that, for example, you focus on those who are already influential, and you just expect that they are going to spread their influence. Another is to change the network, right? So, for example, as you say, someone but I think it's more complicated, for example, with friends, like how to convince someone to be, like you could, for example, do some plays or whatever. Personally, I'm also like kind of hesitant in like this big brother, thinking. So basically, but I think it's for me, it's okay to, for example, try to convince someone to stop smoking. To try to change someone's preferences of friendships, like for example, because we know that people have limited number of friends. So by saying someone, okay, you should have
You should have this.
so it also could mean that basically you will drop a friend.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of
To be very practical, Ivan's question could be the answer after your research will be in progress, that you will be able to come up with predictions like, yes, it's possible for a person from a marginalized background, but first, the person must get perfect performance at school. Second, the person must represent some attractive value background. And third, the person must get like in this informal preference relationship, what is it, popularity, yeah? And then the person can be influential only.
so I would say
Do I?
no. So basically what I wanted to say,
There are these development, dynamic changes in the
yeah,
development.
absolutely. So but yeah, I think it's okay.
So this might be an answer, like hypothesis, that without these 3 steps, it's not possible to get influential.
Yep. So let me rephrase this. So basically, I'm proposing different types of interventions in the first place, but with what Ivan, I think, suggested, basically, I think you are right in that sense, that theoretically we could get there from point 1 to point 2 when, for example, one person becomes influential. Is it feasible? No idea. For example, if you are in very prejudiced classroom, is it possible to, for example, make one person who is ostracized to actually become essential in, for example, 2 years by an intervention? I don't know. When it's possible, for example, I think it's very contextual. It depends on context.
But politically, it's interesting whether it's hypothetically possible for someone from an ostracized background to get influential.
I think hypothetically.
So you could show some paths where it really happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be really interesting to understand how that happened.
But I mean, like, so that is the question, because it's hypothetically possible, but it might never happen because it's just not feasible. Maybe it would happen if you do an intervention every day for 5 years, whatever. So I think like
get popular, change your values, and then
And start smoking.
so.
Forget who you are.
So let me add to that, actually. If I relieve some constraints on that question, so I think you could do an intervention, for example, instead of actually trying to convince popular people to stop smoking, that this influence would spread, you could actually focus on making non-smokers more popular. Perfectly possible intervention, very possible.
Yeah,
it's doable.
Yeah.
If he's, for example, like a minority member, one like he's in a small group in the beginning, also theoretically possible. I'm not sure about feasibility. But that's my attitude only. You could test it if you want, definitely.
Yes.
Ivan.
On your data. Yes.
With simulation approach you could.
Yeah.
OK, máme ešte nejaké otázky v online alebo v offline? Ak nemáme, tak ja sa chcem veľmi pekne poďakovať Tiborovi, že prišiel. A teraz nebojte sa, on neprišiel z Groningen, prišiel z Brna, takže mal bližšie. Ďakujem ti veľmi pekne, Tibor, a keď vás to zaujíma, viete, kde Tibora nájdete. A ja by som chcela poprosiť našich ústavníkov, nech ešte minútu zostanú, prosím, na Zoome, a ďakujem tým z iných pracovisk, najmä Davidovi a ďalším, že prišli si vypočuť Tiborovú prezentáciu. A tá prezentácia sa ide nahrávať, nahráva sa a bude to na našom YouTube zavesené, ak si to chcete ešte raz vypočuť a prejsť si nejaké časti, ktoré možno neboli pre vás zrozumiteľné. Takže poprosím tých, čo sú neni zo stavu, že sa môžu odpojiť, a my ešte chvíľu zostaneme, ale ja zastavím teraz nahrávanie. Zatlieskame. Ďakujeme. A Tibor tiež môže zostať, lebo nejdeme robiť tajnosti, ale ja musím teraz zastaviť to nahrávanie tuto, takto. A teraz